Falchus, sorry about that. I had to take care of something unexpected. I'm really sorry. That never happens. We did a very abbreviated version of our first video number 7, of Glimpses of Other Realities, Linda Moulton Howe, Volume 2, High Strangeness. Let's move on. This is now video 8. Okay. We were talking about this woman named Linda Porter, who had sent an envelope of information to Linda Moulton Howe with a tape cassette and photograph drawings and a letter, and told the story of an hypnosis session that she had that took her back to times that she'd forgotten. After the hypnosis session, she was able to remember lost memories. When she was 15, she was on a small UFO with a bright light. She felt terror, and here's a description of what she saw. Brace yourself. Basically, an insectoid like E.T. So she realized she had been told that she would be put into a state of amnesia and she would not remember. That was her instruction. She was told that these creatures could manipulate time, that they can take and return a person for as long as they want, and the person won't even notice because they can manipulate time. Her second memory, she was taken to an underground base near Santa Barbara. The description was an alien tower in the ocean that was invisible to people, but surrounded by invisible barriers that repel people. Just a whole situation that was not apparent to human beings. And inside was a silver gray building with various colored doors that had weird writing like hieroglyphics or maybe even Arabian script. And her third memory was when she was from 17 years old and she woke up to an orange glow from a hole in her bedroom wall. She saw three-dimensional shadow people stepping out of the hole into her room. They had no features. The edges of the hole sparkled. She was pulled into the hole and then amnesia. She knew that there was a little gray, as she called it, creep watching, and all was present every time that she was taken. And apparently this was not an unusual thing to happen to her. It happened more than once. This is the drawing of this featureless shadow people coming through a hole in her wall. And then she finds herself going through it. This is an even better drawing that she did later. Her fourth memory was being inside of a spacecraft in a round room, that the hole in the wall with dense light sort of appeared, and it had taken her out of the alien craft and had, I don't know, I can't explain it, lowered her down to about 4 feet from the ground, but it was going approximately 80 miles per hour, but as it approached 4 feet from the ground, it changed to 3 miles an hour, landed on the ground in complete silence. She had no vertigo, no physical symptoms. That was that memory. Memory number 5, she was told by the ETs of a place run by General Dynamics called the Sycamore Remote Facility near San Diego. It was called a missile testing site, but it was the place where the government held captured aliens. This is the story she was told. It had 5 to 6 stories underground. And at the bottom floor, there are bodies of ETs in containers of plexiglass. This is what she was told. The ETs wanted to get one of their guys back. And they were held in suspended animation. They weren't dead. The bodies were there, but they were in suspended animation. They were all alive, but unconscious, and this is before 1991. And the description she gave in great detail was like a room that ran this suspended animation through computer technology. Very unusual. These looked human-like. They had blonde hair. They looked kind of boyish, but maybe in their 30s. And she said that this facility had incredible security. That they had security that was unheard of in those days. For example, lock pads, like those panels, where you bump the number in, and that the sequence of numbers to unlock them changed every 2 hours. And within the plexiglass door, you'd go through this door with the panel, and then there'd be a plexiglass area roomed off. And they had to know who you were, because if they didn't know who you were, this room could fill with gas and knock you out. Closed circuit monitors everywhere, not a common thing in 1991. There was an underground tram system from San Diego Naval Base to the Sycamore facility, and another place that actually had its entrance in a garage in an ordinary house on an isolated hill. All paid for by tax money. 2 young Navy guys, she was told, were killed because they inadvertently found out about this. They stumbled on it, and their families were told they died in a tragic Jeep accident. It's chilling, very cynical. Okay. This is a picture that she drew of these humanoids kept in suspended animation. This is a photograph of the facility entrance. That's what it looked like. Pretty low-key looking. Except there's lots of signs that say, do not enter. Then we have the story of Leonard Stringfield from 1991. He is familiar with a case of a UFO crash and retrievals, and he described the same sort of thing that Linda Porter described. Suspended animation ETs. She recorded, Moulton Howe, recorded an interview with, or perhaps Stringfield did, but somebody in this scenario recorded an interview with a guy called Dr. Epigoni and Houston researcher Ron Moulton in 1990 in Houston. Epigoni knew about flying discs and their crews that were held near Edwards Air Force Base. It opened and a humanoid got up and it laid on the ground, and it was sort of like in the middle of some nuclear thing that they were in the process of doing at this Air Force base, and the presence of this being on the ground interrupted the whole test or whatever it was they were doing, and they had to cancel the whole thing, which apparently was the point. Sort of a college protester ET. This being laid there for a while, and then, successfully brought the whole military thing to a halt, and then got up and got in the disc, and it closed, and it settled on the ground. They got our hands on this ET and carted it off for study, and the whole thing was kept in a hangar. And in this recording, the guy says that he thinks the humanoid was put in suspended animation by another craft somewhere else, communicating from a distance. But this event halted a secret bomb test. That's what it was. And MJ-12, that organization, the Majestic 12 of the appointed governmental special guys who know everything and it's a secret, they feared retaliation from ETs if they continued with the test, so they stopped it. Porter and Howe knew nothing about this in February of 1991. Porter lived next to China Lake Naval Weapons Center and Edwards Air Force Base. So this is an example of another abduction of her, Linda Porter. She saw tubes with humans naked and upright, like see-through container tubes, bigger than a human with a human inside. They seemed asleep. Was it suspended animation? Their color was good. They didn't look dead, and they were floating in some sort of purple gas. She said, I was shown this, but no words were exchanged. She says, I really needed to know what was going on, and she said it screwed up her whole life. Imagine. So she has a further memory of this mantis creature that I showed you the picture of. He approached her slowly because he knew that she was scared of him. He had dignity, she said. He seemed old. This seems so weird to describe this, but this insectoid creature exuded wisdom, age, and dignity. He led her to a door to a brightly lit room and was translated into the light. Let's see if that even means anything to me. Oh, this is really pretty funny because there's a picture of it, and I didn't write this down, but this is what this says. The memory ends with me, Linda Porter, about to enter the room, and the thought translated into the light in her head, whatever that means. So this is the scenario she tried to describe. She drew these pictures, by the way, from after her memory was restored somewhat. So Howe kept in touch with Linda Porter, and months later she told Howe that she'd been doing self-hypnosis and remembering more stuff. When she was 12, she was so sick that she saw herself floating above her body to the ceiling. And there was a mantis and a white 5-foot alien with big eyes, and they took her onto a UFO. Not her body, just her. She was taken into a room of light and shown a man of about 46 years old, close to death, in a container. She watched as his soul was lifted out of this dying body through his solar plexus. She described the soul. She could see it as 2.5 feet long and 5 inches wide. It was a soft yellow with a white glowing inner core that radiated gentle heat. It was a pastel orange layer around the yellow. The soul floated across the room to a 25-year-old man. Same man, just a younger version of this guy dying. And the old body was now dead, and the soul went into this younger version of himself. And it went through the back of his head. And the body, she said, before that happened, the 25-year-old body looked kind of empty. And when this soul went into it, it seemed to generate life. It looked like somebody asleep, but no longer empty. The old container filled with preservative to preserve the man's body for a dissection to figure out what contaminated and killed him. So these aliens had some interest in this guy. Then they would toss him out. Dispose of his body. They think funerals are barbaric. The body's just a container, like an empty beer can. I thought that was a very interesting comparison. The 25-year-old was a clone and would be relocated, so it would continue life elsewhere on the planet, but people would not know him and remember him as a 46-year-old. He'd be stepping into the life of himself as 25. And cloned new bodies are stored indefinitely until they're needed. And she saw an earlier picture of containers in storage, and a light is shined on the top of a person to be activated to activate the person. Linda got the idea that the ETs, I think Linda Porter got the idea the ETs weren't supposed to be doing soul transfers. She got the feeling that this was something illicit that they were doing, but that they seemed to almost have no recourse, that was that or nothing. Seemed to be hiding it from a higher form of life. Which, that's funny. But this authority prohibits soul transfer because it interferes with the planet with free will. This entity is much higher evolved. It wields much power over many realms of existence. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about ETs, aren't we? Now, why all of a sudden are we speaking about highly evolved spiritual beings? I think that's so interesting. And this book gets more and more and more into those sorts of conclusions. And if you saw my video about the hum that I made the other day, I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, that you watch it, because I believe, my opinion only, there's an association here. So Linda saw herself die at the age of 17. Now, this is Linda Porter. Saw herself die at the age of 17, and she saw her soul transferred to an identical clone. And it was done because her heart had been damaged by rheumatic fever. Remember when she was 12 and she floated out of her body? She had rheumatic fever, and it caused heart damage, which rheumatic fever does cause often. And she was shown her heart. It had no blood. This is her old heart. And she was told that a chemical poison was spreading on the earth from a secret government testing in outer space. She was told that the byproduct is falling into our atmosphere and concentrating in our water and also our food supply. People living near large bodies of water are at great danger, that it's safer inland, and we should all be drinking and cooking with distilled water. This chemical and 2 other factors will cause a fire in the sky. Nuclear waste and the chemical and particles from government light beam weapon that they have been practicing testing with will lead to a deadly ignition and a chain reaction. Allegedly, this is the story she was told. This will be even more deadly to other worlds and other dimensions, which is why they're getting involved. She was devastated by the ignorance of the government and the military, and these ETs drove that home. This is totally self-damaging on the part of leadership. She says, now I finally understood the magnitude of it, and they weren't allowed to interfere because of free will, and they were extremely frustrated. This whole process is speeding up. Crop circles are intended to be a message, a signal that they've always been around. They've always appeared in the history of humankind, but they've increased in sophistication, and that they're trying to give us a message, and that people who look at them, who are prepared, will subconsciously read a message coded into them. That's so interesting to me. So Howe tells of an event in 1980. She tells of an event that she heard about in 1980. The event was in 1973. Judy Durati, I can't read my writing, had 4 family members in a car. And this is outside Houston, Texas, and they were driving along, and they saw a bright light following the car. And they were like, what is that in the sky? And they stopped. They pulled over to look at it. Next thing they knew, they were arriving home, and it was 2 hours later. They were missing time. They all had headaches, and they all had flashes of memory of ETs. In hypnosis, what she saw was something entirely unexpected. They pulled over, they got out of the car to look at this thing that had a light, and they saw a calf, baby cow, rise up in a beam of light. And then they were in a round room, and there were 2 small gray beings cutting the calf up. This sounded like a story that Linda had been told before. Linda Moulton Howe had been told before. That ETs were analyzing tissue because they were worried that people were polluting the earth and killing themselves. They weren't doing these mutilations to be awful. They were studying tissue content, chemical, poison, toxins in animal life and plant life. The poison has filtered down into the soil, she was told, and the water, and it has to do with plutonium in outer space from human testing and also from underwater testing. These are going to mix with other pollutions in the environment and cause a chemical reaction. ETs are trying to stop the chain reaction to other planets. It's going to cause a reaction that's going to blossom out from here to other places in the universe. They're trying to stop that. When asked why they don't stop it, the ETs got mad at her. And they told her humans are not knowledgeable enough. They're immature. They can't stop it because we won't stop. In 1991, Howe met Linda Porter at a neutral spot for the first time in person. Porter was 45 years old. She was born in 1946 in Portland on a chicken and rabbit and berry ranch. She had 2 older sisters, 1 younger brother. Her 2 sisters were 16 and 18 years older than she. She and her brother they were a surprise, and really took family members by. I suppose if you have a 16 and an 18-year-old, it could be a surprise. They were very different, the 2 of them. As teenagers, she read philosophy. Howe wanted Linda Porter to go into more detail about her memories and drawings, more details of traveling on light beams, and more details about this tunnel through the wall, and beams for traveling between the Earth and this craft. The tunnel was literally a physical hole between dimensions. She actually got sick traveling through it from a change in the density between the dimensions. There's a difference in frequency, and the human body is not wired to cope with that. She remembered some of what this mantis told her and passed it on to Linda Howe. I don't know if I really want to read this whole thing. What we've learned of the physical universe and laws is all wrong. This creature's civilization communicates difficult concepts via the use of symbols that radiate emotion. Ergo, for example, crop circles. They use this form to get concepts across with their exact true meaning intact. They're not always mathematical, but they appear as 3-dimensional holographic pictures that resemble abstract sculptures. They include sound waves, but they're carrier waves. They're not part of the human spectrum. They can be felt, but not heard. Remember the hum. That's all I'm going to say. If the creatures want to clear a certain area of humans, they can broadcast this wave over the area at a certain frequency, and it causes intense fear in people, and they flee the area. It doesn't harm them, but it clears them to do what they want without being seen. They have a hard time translating this into these visual emotional things into words for people. A very hard time. Human semantics are problematic, cause confusion. What's easy to understand on one level of existence is really hard to understand on another level of existence. And in order to understand, we need a couple of things. We need our brains to be developed, and our brains will only develop so much. We only use 10% of our brains. So there's room for improvement. Also, it depends on the right DNA connections, and there's a lot of DNA in our cells that's just sitting there because it hasn't been activated. So let's see here. I'm condensing this as best I can. The universe is built on sound patterns, which is why so many different worlds and dimensions can exist in the same space. Each is just on a different frequency. Think radio channels. Disrupt a world or a dimension to the point that you destroy the carrier wave, and you've created a hole in existence that cannot support the dimension above or below. Each frequency, besides maintaining its own world or dimension, also supports or holds in place the one above and below. Everything is interdependent. This will cause worlds to collapse into a hole, and the resultant area of matter will be compressed into a density that can throw the whole gravitational field off, causing further damage, pulling worlds out of orbit. The process feeds on itself. Countless worlds and dimensions occupy the same space without being aware of one another because of their own individual octaves. These frequencies, and they hold the world or dimension in place and cause it to exist safely without interfering or even being aware of other worlds around us, and act as a buffer zone so it keeps everything in its place. Do anything to disrupt it and you begin to collapse into a deadly chain reaction. Space-time itself begins to collapse. Whatever the experiment is that our government is involved with in outer space, if successful, will change the density of matter to such an extent that the chain reaction started will not be able to be stopped by anybody in any world or dimension. There are literally hundreds of different alien life forms here trying to stop what's happening as it's putting their own worlds at risk. Some are not supposed to be interfering, but they do so anyway. But they're all trying to stop this ripple effect. With their technology, why don't they just walk in and stop the whole thing? Why do they need human abductees to speak for them? She doesn't know. It doesn't make sense. She says, I wonder if we're being lied to, used for some purpose to put over ideas they want us to believe. If there is an experiment, maybe if it succeeds, it would put us in competition with the aliens for something they don't want to share. Maybe they're trying to scare us out of their neighborhood. Maybe this is an apple in the Garden of Eden moment. Just putting that out there. We have an upcoming book, so keep this little maybe thing in mind. Where am I? So our information on physical laws is wrong. There's more to existence than we can understand. ETs communicate with symbols that create emotions. Cannot be misinterpreted as words can. Okay. I actually wrote all this stuff out abbreviated and I didn't realize it. So the universe is built on sound patterns. And just remember, sound, light, color, energy, matter. Only difference in any of those things is how fast the molecules are moving, the frequency of vibration. Only difference. So if you destroy a world or a dimension, you cause a hole, is what they said. And the government experiment could start this, and it would be a chain reaction. And a lot of other worlds and dimensions would be negatively affected. And there's a superior power that is trying to prevent all of this. So Linda Porter is not sure that something fishy might be going on. She describes going through that hole into a dark world that has a little tiny sun, where there were weird round buildings, no vegetation. It was like a cold desert. And she was guided through a yellow door to a lot of humanoid people around a table dressed very oddly. One stood up in a long purple robe, had gray skin, was tall, very thin, cat eyes, no hair, and the top of the head of this creature was round, but it had a nose and ears. It didn't look like the usual gray ET. This is what it looked like. It had no lips, but it did talk with its mouth. It had long, thin hands. The others were listening to him. She said it seemed like they were talking science. And the mantis had great age, that other creature, great age and patience and wisdom. It said a lot. She doesn't remember, but she thinks it was about our future and, quote unquote, translated into the light. The mantis was working with these gold tan colored humanoids. They shared the same ethical and spiritual values, and they had the same goals. And both were highly evolved and working together to do something to help us. She didn't know how the pale guy with the nose that I just showed you fit in. He was not the top power guy. That seems like a god, not the picture, somebody above him. She recalls a dissection of that guy who died that we talked about. And they discovered that the dissection showed that he died of pollution in the water. She said it's so bad, she was warned again, don't live near or drink or cook with water. Regular water, use bottled water. So they dumped him back on Earth, and people who knew him as a 46-year-old, let's say Joe Smith, he disappeared and they just never knew anything about him ever again. And then as a 25-year-old body, he reemerged at another part of the Earth and went on with his life as somebody else. So Howe tells her that there are a lot of missing people. And Porter tells her that they're relocated, like this cloned guy with the young soul, just sort of transferred, placed in other areas of Earth for certain reasons, in preparation for something. She saw the dissection of her own old body and described wave frequency surgical tools that used high frequency vibrations to cut. Now remember, this is very early 90s, and she, that wasn't a thing. She also saw a sound tool that used sound waves, to heal emotional and psychological shocks. Porter describes being more and more ill and weak from the ages of 12 to 17. Heart damage because of the rheumatic fever. Her heart was so damaged, she was very upset by this death. She said, why did they do this? She didn't know this happened to her. She was unaware. She knows they aren't supposed to, but because it interferes with, free will-ish type stuff. But they feel like it's the last resort, and they think that the higher powers don't fully understand something. So there's not a whole story being told to her. Therefore, we're not getting the whole story. It's impossible to completely understand what's going on because they never let on to her. We're apparently not allowed to know. Porter believes that she has a job to do, Linda Porter. She admits that she finds it easier to breathe now and she feels stronger. She got sick at the age of 12, had that out-of-body experience. Under hypnosis, remembered what happened, that she interacted with these aliens. From the ages of 12 to 17, she was sick. Her heart got worse. The next thing you know, she's got a whole brand new heart. And, well, she has a whole brand new body, actually. And she realizes, oh, you know what? I used to have a scar from a vaccine, probably smallpox, because I have scars from smallpox vaccines from when I immigrated. They do fade with time, but they leave kind of a keloid thing. She says, come to think of it, that's gone. It's completely gone. So these gray scientist aliens don't want to lose people to some event in the future. They feel they have no choice but to intervene. It's almost like they're trying to rectify a mistake they made. Howe saw Air Force briefing papers that were written for the president, provided for her anonymously by a whistleblower, that said ETs manipulated the Earth primate DNA to create us, quote unquote. Stay tuned for our next book. Porter thinks a mistake was made, and now with the DNA, and some are now trying to fix that mistake. Porter says these ETs are caretakers. They saw the path that humans are taking, and what did they do? This is very interesting, because wait till we get to our next book. They sent Jesus to show a way to live in harmony to prevent where we are now, which is the path to self-destruction. They put an evolved soul into Jesus's body, but people manipulated the story to control people. So the whole born of whatever and the trip and all of that is part of a larger narrative to control people. However, he was an enlightened soul put in a human body. Porter asks, they saw our future, but they didn't see what Jesus would go through. And interestingly enough, some of the couple of books we've read about, going back through hypnotic regression to the time period, the story is that his experience was necessary to make a point. So Porter was shown a space shot of Earth with a ring of fire around it. Space shot, looking at Earth from a great distance in space. Then the Earth as uninhabitable for 17 to 20 years. The land and ocean were reversed, water moved, and eventually it became clean and new after that time period. And new different societies begin because the ETs remove some people to avoid the catastrophe, and then they will be brought back. And they watched it all from space so that they would never forget. This new society has a new food crop, and it's just the one thing that's easy to grow, and it's inexpensive and abundant. Porter says all we've been told about the universe is completely wrong. When humans were removed, they learned the truth. As they watched what happened to the planet, they learned the truth. When they return, it's a whole different ball of wax. Many alive today wouldn't want to be survivors of this. There is no money. There is no greed. There is no power. There are no status symbols. People are relating on a soul level. All the plants on Earth are restored. She said the ships are like cities, and they will arrive and they will remove people before this catastrophic chain reaction event. Crop circles are subliminal messages that they're coming. Those who are genetically programmed will subconsciously realize that. Huge ships will sweep over and take people. They can bring nothing with them. I can't read my writing. Must have been a lie. No, I copied something here, but I can't read what I wrote. Let's see. Well, it doesn't matter. The governments will be able to do nothing about this, and no weapons will work. Porter said that they will be taken up, and she personally will be taken up, and she's not afraid. She's happy. And when they get to whatever craft they're in, they recognize other souls on a soul level, and it's good. These tan gold, sandy-haired ETs are on the ships. The soul of Christ will be recognized, will appear and say it is finished and blink out. Then the fire in the sky starts, and the final situation that leads to the fire begins in 1993. Okay. People will live on these ships like they're housing. The ice caps will melt. The governments now know what's coming, the future of the earth, and the fact that the soul of enlightened beings like Jesus will be involved. Porter wears overlapping triangles on a chain to remind her of the one she saw on the uniform of an ET. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah, there's a weird symbol in it. that she saw on the craft. She doesn't know what it means, but there it is, that squiggle. So many abductees are allowed to feel a higher level of fear because it will desensitize them. So while they're abducted, they feel this higher level of fear. It's to sort of desensitize them for what's coming. Those who move past that fear during the process, like the guy who learned how to read, they'll move on and they'll be able to deal with the fear and the panic that are going to happen when this event occurs. Case number 2, Wana Lawson, South New Jersey. So Linda Moulton Howe met her in 1992. She stayed anonymous because of her job in Kentucky. She is of Native heritage. In November of 83, she spent Thanksgiving holiday going to New Jersey in the car with her 20-year-old daughter. And in the car behind them was her husband, her 13-year-old son, and her 24-year-old daughter. They stopped for gas. They left, and in half a mile after leaving the gas station, they saw a glow in the sky. Wana, the one telling the story, began to feel like she was hallucinating. There were bright lights and men on the road, and her daughter slumped, stopped holding the wheel. Wana wasn't driving, her daughter was driving. She was going 65 miles an hour, and she just sort of passed out at the wheel. They stopped at a New Jersey Turnpike rest area and discovered that their gas tanks were still full. So we go from getting gas to seeing something hallucinatory to her daughter checking out at the wheel. All of a sudden, they're pulled over at a New Jersey Turnpike. She and her daughter have vague memories of physiological exams by ETs. Now remember, this is in what did we say it was? Early 90s? 92. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Linda Moulton Howe heard about it in 92. The event itself happened in November of 83. So this was not what you call common knowledge. So, wait a minute, I lost my place here. So the notion of being kidnapped by aliens was, So under hypnosis, she got her memory of a large room with tubes with bodies inside. It sounds familiar. That there had been weird lights in the area. So Howe arranged to meet with Wana, and she describes exams done by grays, small grays with big eyes, and a tall ET that took the pain away with just a touch. She remembered a light outside picked up picked both cars up and carried them up. She remembered an 8-foot tall ET with a large nose and a skull cap. Long legs. And the Greys were taking orders from him. Here's another kind of drawing of him in a symbol that she saw. So she's kind of in a dream state, and she sees her husband yelling and resisting what was going on. She sees her son crying, and she sees her daughter asleep, being moved by the small grays. And then this new ET comes in, and he looks native with gold eyes. He wore a metallic uniform with a triangle. That's the picture I just showed you, with 2 triangles, and his touch calmed her. He took her to a room full of tubes. It was city blocks long, thousands of tubes. And some of the bodies that were suspended in the tubes were not even human. And this is a little taste of what that looked like. So he walks her down to a tall woman in a tube and changes bodies. The ET seems to have a relationship with the body that she entered. So I don't know what's going on. She doesn't know how she did it, but then her new body walks with the ET to a domed room where she could see stars. And then they did things. And she was tall, gray, and looked like him. Then she remembered leaving the room to go to a room with a lot of humans in light robes like Greece or Rome, and they were people who decided to stay with the UFO. She said this alien body of hers had 100% different energy, much more evolved intellect. It didn't care for superficiality. These tall ETs were highly evolved spiritually. They put on and removed bodies to achieve goals. They did it like it was a robe. So it was 100% a vehicle for them. Wana says that these tall ETs are the watchers of man, the creators. Stay tuned for our next book. So they wanted to take a sub-level creature like us and prove that they could evolve us. They saw the God force as one with all and pure love, and they wanted to prove that you could turn the impure into the pure and good. They began with early primates, not Neanderthals, and the first men that they were created were tall and hairy, kind of like Bigfoot. She saw a Bigfoot on a UFO. ETs used them to collect samples, and they beamed them up and down. People of different races exist. People look different because ETs use slightly different primates in different places on the Earth. This was a challenge. They did it with DNA, and the ET souls do it like reincarnation, the soul returning in different bodies to teach love, unity, and oneness. So we have this intersection. ET interaction meets spiritual philosophy. So this happened to thousands. And there are good humans. There are humans who are, trying, I guess. The ETs will try to pick up good humans before the Earth is destroyed. This is alarmingly like a certain book that a lot of people live by. Wana says that it will be nukes, that self-destruction, one of them will cause a chain reaction. The ETs are trying to prevent it, and also subconsciously and in dreams contacting abductees to take aboard. So people are being prepared for this. So what they told her is that Jesus was manufactured. His DNA was put into Mary, and it was because it was so advanced, such advanced DNA. It had it created a being with spiritual awareness and had insights to share with mankind, and that there are many more like that all over the world. We just don't know. This is the one that, created the big to-do. Jesus was in communication with ETs. He knew the mission. He didn't really die. He was taken into tubes, and his human body was destroyed in a clone. His spirit went on. They say the Shroud of Turin is real. It was left by his soul as it left his body. I don't know. I saw an interesting little thing yesterday about ancient depictions of Jesus, and the very earliest Christians depicted him as sort of a fresh-faced, baby-faced, blonde young person, not sort of Semitic Middle Eastern person with a beard and dark hair and olive complexion, something completely different. So The presidential briefing paper from 1983 that Linda Moulton Howe saw had said this Jesus story, DNA, spiritually evolved, came to help, taken back up, it happened. So his resurrection was intended as a demonstration to make people pay attention to his message. Buddha, same thing. Different ET groups exist, and one wants to defeat this human experiment. One wants to show that it can't be done. These are controller ETs, and they think humans are despicable roaches, and they help make some humans even worse than they already are. I wonder who that was. They feel superior to all other life, and humans threaten their ego. They don't want to concede to the tall ETs that they should never have done this. They say man worth saving is nonsense. And the controllers want to prove it and win. And so you've got those who don't want to have anything to do with it. We're not worth it. They have those who interfere to get us to survive so they could be in control and in charge, and they win. And then they have the good ones. This is a philosophical argument about DNA manipulation. It's a battle not for souls. It's a battle for proof of who is right about evolved DNA. And in the end, those with good ETs will be with one, capital O, one. And others won't. Wana says, I'm here on a mission, but I don't see I've made any big difference. She's been told that time runs out around 2002. And the Archangel Michael is actually one of those really tall ETs. The tall ones can appear as anything, even as controllers. People can't tell the difference. People won't know. We're all led by what we believe in. And the controllers don't have love. They're cold. They don't have hate. They just don't care. So Wana had a dream, and she was shown a screen where she sees a fire and devastation and explosions. And she knows that she's dead and in a spaceship. She's told to look in the mirror. She sees herself, and she's told you can look however you want. You could be 22 years old. She imagined herself far more perfect than in real life, of course. She was told she and her family died in 1 second in a nuke in their sleep. And then she comes to an awareness as a soul in a spaceship. She saw a scenario on board that would be her father's fantasy scenario. And those not part of the one are outsiders. She woke to a dark room with a spot of light on the ceiling, like a slit of light. A beam was receding into it, and it disappeared in a minute. This is like an abduction experience. This is how it ended. And she knows that if you be good, you don't go into that blackness. Okay, this is where I'm going to stop. This is the end of number 8. Sorry about that interruption. That was unfortunate, but we'll simply continue. And this is a good place to stop because we're on another case. So this is the end of video number 8. And we'll be back with video number 9 momentarily. It's long for it.